watching Beyond Markets. Welcome, I'm Esther Awoniyi. Many thanks for joining us. On today's show, we'll discuss how gender metrics impact investment decision making. We'd love for you to join today's conversation. Just use the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther Awoniyi. Now, a recent Refinitiv report on environmental, social and governance gender metrics reporting shows that investors are increasingly considering companies that engage in ESG reporting as part of their investment decision-making. Franita Neuville, Market Development Manager, Investment and Advisory at Refinitiv, joins me to discuss this. Franita, thank you for taking the time out to join us. It's quite interesting how we're seeing ESG evolving, especially as regards how investors perceive it and want it to be and want to invest in be part of companies that practice it. But now we're talking about that from a point of view of gender metrics. Now, you've put out a report showing how this is panning out as far as gender metrics is concerned. But I'd like you to start by just helping us understand why this is becoming increasingly important to investors.
Yes, morning Esther, thanks for having me. So what we've seen in recent months and quarters is that alternative data is becoming more and more important for investors to take into their investment decision-making process. And this obviously is another way of them searching and trying to get more alpha out of their investments. And ESG is one of those areas. So what we've done in celebration of International Women's Day, we actually had a look at how diversity and inclusion and gender metrics gets reported by companies who focus on ESG reporting, and how that then flows through to the investment decision-making process and how we make that information available to our customers.
Now, there's an increasing growing perception that the broader the pool of talent open to an employer, the greater chance of finding the optimum person for the job. Would you say that this is basically the underlying principle here? I mean, if you open up, give more opportunities to women, bringing in more diversity, then at the end of the day, it positively impacts the bottom line of the company.
So the research we've done didn't show that there was a correlation. We didn't really look at that. We more looked at what type of information is being reported by companies. So for instance, we are seeing that more companies in 2017 versus 2013 actually reported on what their gender metrics looked like, which is definitely a step in a positive direction, seeing that most of the companies a couple of years ago didn't really report on ESG or gender metrics. It just wasn't important for them. So now that these numbers are being reported, we can actually start doing those types of studies as well in the markets. But for now, it's literally just getting these companies to report more on their gender metrics.
Okay, now the report highlights 5 key gender metrics, as you mentioned, based on ESG reporting over 4,000 companies over a 5-year period. Now let's take those 5 one after the other. Let's start with, the level of female or women representation at the board and executive level. We're seeing, according to the report, there's been an increase in the number of women at the board and executive level, but this hasn't been the case at the lower employee level. Could you shed more light on that for us?
Yes, so basically at an executive board and an executive and a board member level, we did see a bigger growth number in the percentages that we saw as opposed to in the managerial and the employee numbers that were actually reported. Having said that though, the employee and the manager numbers did come off of a higher base, so the board and the executive numbers are still not quite as high as what we are seeing at the managerial and the employee side. So, and you would have actually expected now that those numbers are actually getting closer together, but they're not exactly where they should be at the moment.
Well, what do you think, going forward, going into the future, what do you think could begin to change these numbers at the board and executive level?
So what needs to happen is that there needs to be a healthy pipeline of women employees that can actually take up those executive and those board member positions. And that is one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing not only in emerging markets but also in developed markets, that there isn't a healthy enough pipeline of employees, women employees coming through who's willing to take up those senior roles and who's actually willing and able to take those more senior roles. So it's all about companies making sure that their succession planning is happening, that they are retaining the ladies that show potential. It's all around those two very important metrics.
So this isn't a question of a skills deficit or a lack of experience. It's just the lack of the opportunity being given to these women.
So I would say it's a little bit of both. By creating, one of the things that you need to incorporate when you create a healthy pipeline of ladies coming through is making sure that they have the skills and the ability to do those top management roles. And on the other side, it's about giving them the opportunity, and that's what we see in the third point that we'll discuss is more around the gender gap, which we are still seeing is quite significant, especially at those top levels.
I know that, there have been conversations around this, and especially, as you mentioned, this year's International Women's Day, the theme, balance for better. Talking about getting more balance, especially from a business perspective across all sectors. Do you think that these conversations, because, we've been having these conversations gaining more momentum in the last couple of years, would you say that they're having the desired impact? Would you say that they're moving the needle in terms of when we look at these numbers and we see the gaps, especially in the corporate ladder, we continue to see these gaps? Would you say that these conversations are having some kind of effect?
They definitely do. So in certain parts of the world, and I guess that's where then the fourth point comes in, where we looked at the gender metric being disclosed in certain regions of the world. We're definitely seeing that women are being more included in certain regions of the world than others. So for instance, the numbers showed that in Japan, for instance, the inclusion of women is definitely not where it should be in comparison to other developed countries. And the region that actually has done quite well is Europe, including women, especially in executive roles. So when you look at the list of countries who've in the G10 who've performed the best on this front, you've got 3 European countries at the top, France, Italy, and Germany. So in certain regions of the world, there's definitely progress happening. And interestingly, so France has actually brought out legislation around this, that more women needs to be included on boards and also in executive roles. So I think that it needs to come from a government as well, where they can maybe, help with legislation that they bring in to ensure the inclusion of more ladies at the top jobs.
Help us understand, from this report, because I see that you also linked it to the GDPs of these countries. Help us understand that part.
So we basically just wanted to define a group of countries that we can look at in the report, and we showed that the top 10 countries, for instance, there's a very diverse outcome when it comes to looking at whether women are included in the workforce or not. So, for instance, so in the top 10 countries, there wasn't really a good correlation that one could draw between, yes, you have good GDP growth and you include a lot of ladies in the workforce. It was more just to look at the diversity that we see in the results in the top 10 countries.
Now, you mentioned earlier that this should be, in terms of giving it a push, in terms of moving the needle, it would probably need to start from the government of these countries. Now, especially in those regions where we're seeing low representation of women at senior managerial levels. Would you say that governments are listening? Is there any indication whatsoever? I know that France is doing something. Would you say that other countries will have the political will to go ahead and do that?
So I think another example is definitely South Africa, which fares quite well against some of these other developed countries when it comes to including women in the job force, and especially at executive and board level. And again, that's a directive that comes from the government as well, where they kind of pushing along and encouraging companies to include more ladies. So it's about government working with companies, and I think it's also about other institutions and influential organizations which can help with this. For instance, we're now seeing the Nigerian Stock Exchange came out with their sustainability guidelines, where companies are actually encouraged now to report on their sustainability metrics, which will include gender metrics. And that needs to be done by the end of March of 2021. So it's these kind of initiatives that will definitely further help include women in the job force more.
Would you say that it's one thing to have better or higher women representation on these boards? Would you say that it will help if we do see tangible benefits? Now, I'm just saying this here. This is just my opinion. Would you say that it could help in terms of gaining more momentum with the conversations and with the actual actions if there is, we do see tangible benefits as a result of women being on these boards or holding these senior managerial positions? Or you don't think that shouldn't necessarily be the case?
Globally, there's been a look at women getting paid less even though they do the same job as a man. I can't really comment on that when it comes to this study because we didn't look at executive remuneration or board member remuneration. But I think there's other benefits that would entice women to actually, stay longer at an organization or longer in the job market. So for instance, if you have a family, more flexi time, so that you can look after your children, it's little things like that, I think, that will make a bigger difference.
All right, Franita, we're going to take a short break. Well, thank you for your time so far. We'll come back and pick up from where we left off. I've been speaking to Franita Neuville, Market Development Manager, Investment and Advisory at Refinitiv. If you're just joining us, Franita Neuville, Market Development Manager, Investment and Advisory at Refinitiv, is with me today, and we're discussing how gender metrics impact investment decision making. Thank you, Franita, for your time so far. Let's pick up from where we left off, talking about gender diversity by industry. Now, the report did look at different sectors and looked at the level of female or women representation. Could you just help us shed more light on that?
Sure, Esther. So I think the findings were pretty much what we expected. So there were obviously industries that stood out when it came to including women in their job force and on their boards, and then others that you kind of would have expected that there would be more men working in that industry, which didn't fare as well. So if you look at the top industries when it comes to women representation, they are the ones that we expected. So it would be retail, food producers, your financial services. Those type of industries fared much better than, for instance, the ones that didn't do as well, like mineral extraction, automotive production, chemical industries, those type of industries where you usually see more men working in those industries in any ways.
Franita, how do women break those barriers in those sectors that are traditionally or have been traditionally dominated by men?
I think unfortunately there is a stigma around some of those roles that they're usually meant for men, which is not the case, and that's what we need to break. So for instance, women can also be mining engineers. Women can also be, architects working at, or sketch artists working at automotive companies. So it's all about getting women more involved in these type of roles and breaking that stigma, where this is only a job usually done by boys and men. and it's especially true for the STEM industry as well, which hasn't transformed that well at all, especially on the technology and engineering side. And we really want to see further transformation in those industries, which traditionally is linked to men working in those industries, which is completely not realistic, and it's not right necessarily. So women can also do these roles, and that's where it's quite encouraging to see organizations such as Girls Who Code and those type of organizations come through that actually teach young girls that this isn't an option for you as a career, and you can be, for instance, a coder.
But with what you've seen on the ground, realistically speaking now, do you think that it may take a while before we do see significant progress in that area?
It is going to take a couple of years. So again, if you use the example of the Girls Who Code transformation, these girls are all still quite young. They're either just entering high school or in high school, but so they still have some way to go before they can actually, before they enter the workforce, after university maybe, and then, when they get to those upper levels. So it is definitely going to take a couple of years, but I think it's very important for the transformation to start at grassroots level, and for these young girls to realize that this is an option for them. But you're very right in saying that it will take some time.
And now, your report also highlights STEM importantly, and you say that this is an area which has received a lot of controversy and attention for their lack of gender transformation in recent years. It also mentioned that there's still no indication of a strong commitment to have more female representation even in the near future. Tell us about that.
Yes, so specifically on the technology and engineering side, we're still seeing low numbers of young ladies looking to that as careers while they're in high school or when they're studying, whether it be at a university or a college, in tertiary education. We're not seeing a lot of ladies interested in those areas. And again, it comes back to the stigma where it's generally and traditionally linked to a job that a man would do. So this needs to be changed at high school level when people start choosing their careers, at university level, because otherwise we're never going to break that cycle. And I think, unfortunately, the technology and some of those STEM industries are still, to a certain extent, unregulated. So it's very much private health companies who do some very interesting work, but for them it doesn't matter how many female executives they have. For them, it's more about the product that they can deliver. So the encouragement to get more young ladies into that industry needs to come from the young lady side who actually study in that area and then enter the opportunity and the job market through what she studied.
Do you think that we're also, because I've heard some experts say that, as far as, breaking or closing the gender gap, especially in business at a board level, it's a battle of mindsets, especially in some African, here on the continent, some African countries that are just beginning to, really embrace technology, really now beginning to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. Would you say that we need to, first of all, get past that mindset, looking at getting past the mindset of what the traditional role of a woman should be? Because many of these women are not just career women, they're also wives, they're mothers, they have the home life, trying to balance career and the home life. Do you think that that is perhaps one key barrier that maybe some companies feel that the woman may not be able to succeed at that level because she's juggling work, she's juggling a career, and she's also juggling a family?
I think in some cases you definitely see, unfortunately, that stigma when you do take a woman into consideration for a position, a woman candidate. And I think this comes back to an earlier point I made where I said that, you know, possibly something that could entice ladies more to move into these type of roles is to have a little bit more flexibility. So take into consideration that, you know, she can work flexible hours, seeing that she's got a small baby, for instance, and a family to look after. But just as long as the job is done right, you know, that's not necessarily a problem. I think what we are going to see, though, is more and more international investors are looking at investing in Africa to diversify their investments, and also to, as I said earlier, look for alpha and turn to new regions for getting that. So we're going to see a push, I think, from their side as well, for more women to be included as more companies start reporting on their ESG metrics. So what we're seeing globally is that more companies is definitely looking at ESG when they do make their investment decision. And this is definitely going to impact on African companies who need to start reporting on their ESG metrics so that they can be taken into consideration for those investments. And as a result there, to have a good ESG score, you're going to have to look at including more women into your workforce.
Now, I'm just trying to picture, I mean, the workforce of the future here in Africa and those roles that African women will be able to fit into, maybe that's not the right phrase. Those roles that women will be able to earn, you know, get especially on the board. But do you think that for those investors themselves, when they do not see that traction, when they do not see some key companies that they're interested in, that they know that will give good returns either in the medium or the long term, if they do not see those companies, you know, having strong ESG gender metrics, what do you think, I mean, what options would those companies have? Would they have to focus on those other companies that they're already investing in and are already practicing a good ESG gender metrics and just leave out the other ones who are not catching up?
So it's all about these days being competitive globally. And a lot of companies in Africa is starting to realize that, and that's why we're seeing like the NSE coming out with their sustainability guidelines, so that their members and their listed companies can actually remain competitive on a global basis. So what we're seeing is, for instance, some of the global fund managers who might be managing an African fund or a frontier markets fund or an emerging markets fund, they do look at ESG metrics when they make their investment decision-making process, and they actually do cut out some companies who don't report where there isn't any ESG scoring taking place. So where there's no information available, that's almost like the first screen in some of these cases where that gets taken into consideration, and if they don't report on governance, then we're not going to even consider looking at this company further for an investment. So from that perspective, and to remain internationally competitive, African companies, you know, need to start taking ESG factors into consideration and start reporting on them.
Now, for Refinitiv, is this something you're going to be keeping your eye on? I know you say you did this because, I mean, perhaps in commemoration of a celebration of International Women's Day, but I know this was done over a 5-year period. Is this something that you're going to continue to track in the future? And are you hopeful that these numbers could or would significantly change?
So definitely, we've been working in the ESG space and gathering data in this space and making it available to our clients for the last 15 years now. So it's definitely an area we are focusing on, and that's very important to us. We actually do have a diversity and inclusion index, which is called our D&I index, which we release at the end of July every year. And this includes the 100 best companies in the world when it comes to diversity and inclusion, which ties directly back to the gender metrics that we looked at in this report. So this was a once-off report. I'm not saying that we won't look at these metrics again, But the DNI index and the DNI scoring, that happens on a continuous basis, and the index gets released on an annual basis. So it's definitely something that's close to our hearts, and that we'll continue doing, and that we're hoping to see this trend continue, where we're seeing more women being included in the job force right across the board, whether it be from just an employee on the ground to your executive board level.
Franita, thank you so much for sharing that with us today. We really do appreciate your time on the show today. I've been speaking to Franita Neuville. She's a Market Development Manager, Investment and Advisory at Refinitiv, and we've been discussing how gender metrics impact investment decision making. Well, that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of the show on our website. That's cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther or Awoniyi. For myself and the team, it's bye for now.